So, as Art said, I'm a Manitoba farm girl, so I wasn't here for the beginning of the fight against Site C in 1975, but Gwen was. Gwen was one of the founding members. And as you can tell, that this fight has been going on, a bad idea that just will not go away after over 35 years now. And when you see the picture on the left, I mean, these people don't look like a bunch of tree-spiking social activists. They're just people who wanted to farm and make their living in one of what I believe, after seeing 24 countries in the world, I believe is one of the most beautiful places on earth. And the picture on the right is protesting again when Site C came back onto the radar for the third time. Sometimes when proponents of Site C, you hear lay people saying, and politicians, and they say about the people being flooded out of their homes and out of this valley, they say, sacrifices must be made. And I think, when you hear sacrifices, someone say sacrifices must be made, you know darn well it's not the person making the sacrifice. Now, this is the face of one family that it has been making would make that sacrifice. It's a face of the PVA, as is Gwen. Gwen would be flooded out. This is the Bentley family. Almost 40 years ago, in 3 generations, fighting to save their farm in the Peace River Valley at Bear Flats. Now, Bear Flats is this amazing place. It has great significance for the Duniza Beaver people. It was a meeting place, a seasonal meeting place for them. When Alexander Mackenzie came up the river, Bear Flats is at the essence of the creation of this country. This place we call Canada. Alexander Mackenzie, when he was traveling upstream on his way to the Pacific Ocean, when he camped at Bear Flat, he looked at the wildlife tracks, moose and elk and deer, and he said it looked like basically a barnyard there. It's such a really ecologically important place. Anyways, the Bentley family farm is at Bear Flat. And so that's Lloyd up in the corner, and Lloyd's granddaughter, Arlene Boone, and her husband Ken now farm on that property, and they are passionately opposed to Site C. And I moved to BC in the mid-'80s when the Site C was just being contemplated the second time around, and I got in on the edge of the fray. And in the past 6 years, I've been at ground zero of the fight against Site C, and sometimes I am just so sick of this damn dam. But when I look at people like Gwen and Arlene and people who have become my friends because of this fight, I will never give up fighting this, because I will never let these people down and have their homes flooded out from under them. In that picture also, the fight against Site C has developed a relationship between the non-Aboriginal people and First Nations, which I think is one of the most marvelous things. So in that picture you have, in the lower corner here, you have Chief Derek Org of the McLeod Lake Indian Band, and then the gentleman with the sunglasses on is Russell Lilly of the Halfway River First Nation. And it's beautiful the way the people are coming together to fight for this ancient, magnificent valley. So, thank you. So in 35 years of fighting a battle, you have to have some fun sometimes. So the PVA, among all the rabble-rousing and public education and intervener status activities we do, we also try and celebrate the Peace River. And we have an annual event called the Paddle for the Peace that was established in 2006. It was a joint project between the West Moberly First Nation and the PVEA, and now other Treaty 8 First Nations are joining us together. And so this is just an image, some of the images from the Paddle for the Peace. So we're very proud of our shared history. The First Nations people welcomed the Europeans when they came, and they weren't necessarily treated well for that welcome either, that's for sure. But Chief Roland Wilson of the West Moberly First Nation, he's a colleague on the paddle for the Peace Planning Commission or Committee, and he said a couple of years ago, you know, it's come back. It's taken a couple of hundred years, but it started out the First Nations and the Europeans were together, and we went apart, and now we're back together over this fight to save the Peace River Valley. The top photo is Doig River First Nation Elder Jack Escotti and his grandson. So this was a paddle for the peace in 2009, and Jack came and he wanted to use a raft based on the design his grandfather taught him to make. And a few of us safety bears, when we saw him get ready and put his grandson on the raft that morning, we were like, oh no, liability. You know, Jack, that was an absolutely sound watercraft, and he blew everybody away, all the kayakers and everyone. He was down the river, one of the first people down the river, and he was at home already by the time we all caught up. And below, there's in 1934, there was a French industrialist that came and had an expedition, a Champagne expedition through the Rocky Mountains, and he picked up some cowboys from Hudson's Hope, which is upstream on the Peace, and they needed cowboys to help them get on this amazing voyage. Bedeau, actually, he brought Citroën vehicles, and he brought his wife and I believe his mistress as well, which is, you know, the ultimate in people management, if you ask me. But he also took a bunch of cowboys from Hudson's Hope. And so on our 2009 paddle, there was a reenactment of the Bedeau expedition. The cowboys had to take a raft downstream to Fort St. John to pick up the expedition. And these are descendants of the original cowboys. So all these people coming together, passionate about one river valley. So as well as rabble-rousing and having fun, we are in stage 2 of the BC Hydro Site C consultation process. Their budget was over $40 million for that process. And the PVA, we raised money by all sorts of things. 2 weekends ago, I was picking beer cans in the ditch along Highway 29 with my other colleagues. We, you know, historically, they had bake sales and donating crops to the good. We've also been very fortunate in having, you know, some very, very large foundations, charitable foundations, try and help. So the Peace Valley has friends all over North America and, you know, from all walks of life. But this is, you know, trying to raise money to fight a budget of 40 million plus is it's a lot of work. So you hear, over the years I've heard, when proponents of Site C, and usually people, not BC Hydro, but general public, they'll say, well, why not a third dam on the Peace? There's 2 dams already, it's all screwed up. Well, this is not a screwed up landscape. When you have 2 existing dams on the Peace River, BC's Peace, all that does is make the portion of the river that's remained intact more valuable, not less valuable. And as I say, this is truly some of the most magical places I've ever seen. And I'm a wildlife biologist that spends a lot of time in helicopters in the mountains, but some of the most magical places I know are in this valley. So I'm going to just tell you a bit about it, but what's worth fighting for in the next few slides. And what we would stand to lose. The Peace River Valley is not just it's not the valley of the people of northern BC, northeastern BC. As I said before, it's a valley that it's at the root of Canadian heritage and British Columbia heritage. And if you read the Peace River Chronicles, excerpts from writers, surveyors, explorers, and early settlers, you know, it's an amazing place. The early surveyors came across from the East Coast and they compared the land agricultural potential to areas in southern Ontario. This is an important place. And as Liz was mentioning, the paddle wheelers historically worked the river on a seasonal basis. There's a dugout canoe, and it's a valley for all time. The Rocky Mountain Fort was on the Peace, is just upstream of the mouth of the Moberly, just upstream of the proposed Site C dam site. It was built in 1794, and it's yeah. Versatile stick. And this was the first European settlement in British Columbia. And so the explorers that traveled the piece at that time read like a who's who of British Columbia history, in addition to Alexander Mackenzie, Simon Fraser, and David Thompson. And I said, Simon Fraser figured out which end of the paddle to put in the water on the piece, and then he moved on farther south. That early history, there was a symbiotic relationship between the First Nations and the Europeans that came. The fur trading forts were there, but they relied on the First Nations people to bring them the fur. And so again, really important to our history. What we would lose, agriculture. Being a Manitoba farm girl, and Canadian farmers have occasionally struggled with European farm subsidies. And when I was a kid, my dad always said, the Europeans will never, ever let their farmers down because they know what it's like to be hungry. And in BC, we've never really on a broad scale known what it's like to be hungry, and we are destroying our agricultural land base so rapidly. Site C would be the largest exclusion of agricultural land from the Agricultural Land Reserve ever. So, and at a time when we've been sold a bill of goods in the last few years that Premier Gordon Campbell liked to say, we need Site C because of climate change, and we need Site C because our population is going to increase by 1 million people. Well, let me tell you, electricity is easy. My husband, we're both biologists. We've got a wind turbine that he made by himself, YouTube design that operates part of our office equipment. Electricity is easy, and the variety is untold. But agricultural land, they're not making any more of it. And so when you think about climate change and you think about the increasing global population, the last thing you want to do is to destroy this land. In BC, the Canada Land Inventory has 7 classes of agricultural land, of soils. And class 1 and 2 are the highest. Class 1 is highest capability and relatively few limits to what can be grown. And the Peace River Valley has 18% upstream and downstream of the proposed Site C, but contains 18% of the Class 1 land in British Columbia. There's only Class 1 and 2 combined, 1.5% of the total land base in British Columbia is Class 1 and 2 combined, and 18% of the Class 1 is here in this valley. So this is a picture of where the approximate flood level would be. You hear a lot of people, sometimes you'll hear radio call-in shows, BC Almanac, people will say, they're just growing hay in that valley. That's because of Site C and the uncertainty associated with Site C. And as you'll see later, there are huge issues with geotechnical issues where sloughing and loss of land due to sloughing and erosion, long-term erosion potential, and loss of land because of highway realignment, transmission line corridors, none of that is encompassed in this 11,000 acres. And of those 11,000 acres, there's 422 acres of Class 1 and the 650, almost 700 of Class 2. Okay, so now we've got highest capability soils in the country, literally in the country. And we look at, as Gwen said, the Peace Valley breaches the Rocky Mountains, and it brings warm Pacific air into an area that's dominated by the Arctic airshed traditionally. And so at a latitude that's comparable to southern Siberia, we are capable of growing. The agricultural potential is more comparable to southern Alberta and Saskatchewan because of that warm air coming into northeastern BC. And also because of slope and aspect, we've got that and factor, and then also just the microclimate of the valley itself. The growing season is approximately 2 weeks longer on the alluvial flats of the valley than the adjacent plateau. And I don't live in the valley. I'm not a resident, but they have crocuses blooming when up in Fort St. John, 20 minutes away, we're kind of knee deep in snow. So So you have this combination of high capability soils and that unique microclimate and longer daylight hours. It's getting light at 3 in the morning in the summertime in Fort St. John. Those very long growing days, it gives you irreplaceable food production potential. And this is very important. We need security of supply of our food. And so when people think about the 100-mile diet, this is our 100-mile diet you're looking at. And as I said, 42 vegetable crops capable of being grown. Arlene Boone's mother grows cantaloupe in her garden up at 56 degrees north latitude. So this is Larry and Linda Peterson's Silver Springs farm. So Larry and Linda immigrated from Idaho to the Peace River Valley in the 70s. And this family's American dream was to grow potatoes in the Peace River Valley of British Columbia. And Larry and Linda have been tirelessly fighting this dam for 35 years. It's the face of the dam, it's taken its toll on them. You can't live with this black cloud over your head for that time. And they don't live in the valley anymore, but they live in Alberta, but they still fight the dam. So this is just a picture of the produce from Larry and Linda's farm. In the 70s, this is the thing to remember, on 100 acres on those alluvial flats in the 70s, Larry and Linda were consistently growing 2,000 tons of potatoes a year on 100 acres. So yeah, that's a lot of zeros there. So lots of French fries. So huge potential. BC was 73% self-sufficient in food in 1985. Today, we're only 48%. That's the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. And as far as vegetable production, we're only 43% self-sufficient. And in comparison, if you took in the entitlement to the Columbia River Treaty, that BC Hydro has dealt with, or the government of BC has dealt with the United States, we would be, I believe, 103% sufficient in electricity. So what we would lose, ecology. This is, as I say, I'm a wildlife biologist. This is important habitat on a continental scale. One of the things when I think about what would break my heart the most if Site C ever goes ahead, I think about the loss of these massive balsam poplar and birch that grow in the riparian areas in the valleys. These trees are so important for a multitude of species. Fisher used partially decayed balsam poplar, really large diameter trees, for natal and maternal dens. And they don't just need one den. They need several. They're pretty sophisticated as the late winter season progresses. They have to find dens with the holes that face the right direction so that they aren't getting heat stressed, and they and their kits, and very sophisticated, but you need a lot of trees. And Fisher their populations have really declined in British Columbia, and the BC government status report in Fisher directly attributes that to the creation of hydro dams on many of our major river valleys. But these trees are so important to the ecology, and they're brilliant. And when, a couple of years ago when there was a natural blowdown from the storm in Stanley Park, we just about had a national day of mourning. These are our Stanley Park trees, except they would not blow down in a natural stand initiating event, as we biologists like to call it. They would be bulldozed down, and because they have a high degree of decay, they're not even merchantable. So it would be a travesty. The Peace Valley is because of that microclimate and that Pacific air, it's home to a lot of species that you wouldn't expect to see at 56 degrees north. And one of these is a prickly pear cactus. This is brittle prickly pear cactus. And as you can see in the map in the corner, that's the distribution map. And it's throughout the Chilcotin Caribou, and then there's a large gap in distribution, and you find species that you ordinarily would find much farther south. and prickly pear it's unique to the north. What would we stand to lose aquatic ecosystems? We don't have salmon, but we have salmonids, and many members of the salmon family. And the picture below is a bull trout. The Ministry of Environment in the mid-90s did a radio telemetry study on bull trout and found that some of them that migratory individuals would move from the Halfway River in the Upper Peace watershed to downstream into Alberta. Some of the fish moved that far. Arctic grayling, when the Bennett Dam went in, they went red-listed. They had a red-listed status above the dam for many years because of what happened to their population. And we have 31 species of fish in the Peace. Habitat for all seasons. Ungulate, the Peace is very important for ungulate populations. And if you've ever been there, if you've ever driven Highway 29, people are blown away. You can see in the warm summer evening, you could see a couple of hundred mule deer in the valley, and it's amazing. And it's very important moose habitat. And so it's important for winter habitat and all seasonal habitat. But as Liz said earlier, those islands in the Peace are very important habitat for predator avoidance for the moose and deer and elk. They go to give birth on the islands and avoid the bears and wolves and coyotes somewhat. And so. And as well as the other species that come neotropical migrants that come to the Peace Valley to nest. So this is the Watson Slough. It's an example of the biodiversity of the valley. This would be underwater, and this is a long way from it's much higher. It's on the bench above the river, a long way from the river, but it would be flooded on all those trees. Just an example, I believe there are over 300 fish and wildlife species native to the Peace within the proposed Site C flood zone. And when I look at this picture, I think about the recent interest in the eaglet with the remote camera that has been, the entire world has been watching the fate of this eaglet. This river valley is full of active eagles' nests that would be knocked down. And beaver, occasionally I hear in Vancouver that a beaver that's causing flooding in a residential area has to be removed, and there's an outcry. Well, this river valley, it's over, about 110 kilometers between the Peace, the Halfway, and the Moberly River Valley, full of beaver habitat. And these animals they don't move someplace else when you take away their habitat. It's lost forever. So the red arrow, the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative was created about 15 years ago now, I believe, and to maintain an international initiative to maintain habitat connectivity between Yellowstone in the United States and the Yukon. And so there's the larger yellow polygon shows the Yellowstone to Yukon area. And the pinch point where the red arrow is the Peace River Break. The Peace River Break is a priority area for Y2Y. And if you could see if that was a transparent polygon where the PRB is, you would see that the Williston Reservoir, Dinosaur Reservoir, and the remaining Peace River Valley run through that. It's a pinch point. It's the narrowest part of the Yellowstone to Yukon area. It's critical to connectivity movement between wildlife populations in the southern Rockies and the northern Rockies. And grizzly bears are one species that move throughout the valley. So this slide is just illustrating habitat connectivity and the major drainages that come in from the side. Animals are moving through there, and really important for over time genetic health of populations to be able to move. So flooding that valley would cause a break. And what happened with the Peace Break, the two existing dams in the reservoir, the Bennett Dam backed up over 350 kilometers of water between the Peace Reach, the Finley Reach, and the Parsnip Reach. So when you've got a huge reservoir that used to be a river and the river valley, you cut off connectivity. And so now the existing Peace River is that much more important. Recreation and tourism, as I said before, truly, because of the proximity to the Alaska Highway, we get visitors traveling Highway 29 along the Peace River from all over the world. And when they hear that British Columbia is considering flooding this valley, they look at you like, are you people insane? Like, how could you do it? It's world-class scenery and world-class recreation as well. So this is, the white's not showing up, but the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC has named it. This year it was the third most endangered river in British Columbia. The BC Peace also has a designation as a BC Heritage River. That was in the late 1990s. If you click on it, we have an animation there too. So this picture was taken just downstream of Hudson's Hope. So that would be at the top end of the proposed Site C reservoir, roughly 83 kilometers from the proposed dam site if it ever went forward. So, and as you can see, hydro reservoirs don't make great recreation. Magical places. This picture is self-explanatory. It's paradise up there. And just had to include a winter shot because winter in the Peace Country is beautiful too. And if you're not afraid of 25 below, it's fun. So what does, so far in my portion of the presentation, it's been about us in the Northeast. But now I'm going to have a few slides that talk about why Site C is not just our problem, it's all of our problem. We're very generous, we share our problems. So. What we would stand to lose, the fight against climate change. And as I mentioned, we're being sold a bill of goods about Site C and climate change. Richard Neufeld, the former BC Energy Minister and now a senator, Canadian senator, was in Fort St. John last year explaining that over 50% of the electricity from Site C was needed in the north of Fort Nelson in the Horn River Basin to extract shale gas. As Liz or Art were mentioning, the shale gas plays up there. Ecologically, shale gas extraction is a very serious concern. So these arrows connect the dots on why Site C is not clean power. If they're looking at sending over half the electricity to the Horn River Basin, they'd flood over 100 kilometers of major river valley. They'd send that electricity up to the Horn River shale gas play. There's huge issues with boreal ecotype caribou up there and water issues, among other things. Because the Americans now have developed their own shale gas, there's not a great demand for that Horn River gas, so they're looking at sending it east. The oil and gas industry is looking at sending it east to the Alberta tar sands, where it will be used, natural gas used in the SAGD process where you extract the oil from the tar sands, the steam-assisted process. So, and then from the tar sands, we all know about the Enbridge pipeline, the proposed Enbridge pipeline to the west coast, Hartley Bay, and that killer whale habitat and enormously important ecological areas where we would have, and that pipeline would be running two ways. It would be taking crude oil to the coast, but it would also, because the tar sands oil needs to be thinned in order for it to flow in a pipeline, so then it would be condensate, which is a hydrocarbon byproduct of natural gas, would be shipped east to the tar sands, and it would be, condensate is highly corrosive, and it's not nice stuff, and highly corrosive to pipelines, by the way. So we've got this link from where the electricity to Site C is potentially going, and there's nothing clean about it. If you know much about climate change, you'll know that we are behind the eight ball. We have missed the majority of our milestones that we needed to get ahead of it, and what we need to do now is adapt and mitigate. And one of the main mitigations and adaptations is protect your food supply. And so you want to protect your food growing land base. The traditional North American bread baskets are becoming less reliable, water shortages and effects of climate change. And the greatest security is geographic diversity of your food supply, so that you see in Manitoba is getting flooded out right now, Manitoba farmers. Those farmers aren't putting crops in this year. You need to be someone else to be growing those crops. So that geographic diversity, and the 100-mile diet, which ties in with the increasing cost of oil and an increasing cost of food transport. So that's mitigation. From a species conservation perspective, the best chance for adaptation is for the ability for species to make a northward shift in order to find habitat that's suited to them with increasing global temperature. This is a picture of a grizzly bear crossing through a cleared area in the valley, but they're going back and forth on a seasonal basis. If you build a dam that fails, you still have to pick up the tab. If you build a dam that has serious problems over its lifetime, it gets expensive, and there have been long-standing significant concerns, geotechnical concerns, on Site C, about the Site C, the Peace River Valley and the Site C reservoir. So the inherent slope instability is a significant issue for the construction of the dam, and that's from an engineering report commissioned by BC Hydro. The shoreline instability and sloughing, in the last 100 years, there have been 4 major slides within the proposed flood zone that have actually cut off the river. And the Atashi slide was very large in 1973. In 1957, the soils in the Peace River Valley, the clay soils, when they're saturated, they fail. They form plates and they slide and they fail. And so the Peace River Bridge, the original one in 1957, collapsed after a week of heavy rains. And that bridge site is 15 kilometers downstream of the proposed dam site. Just another picture of the Atashi slide. You can see big concern BC Hydro has had over time with the Site C proposal is that when that slide occurred, there was a tidal wave happened. That slide is still active, as are a number of others. One of their concerns is that if a massive slide ever occurred, it would create a wave that would ricochet down the valley and actually overtop the dam, and you don't want to overtop an earth-filled dam with a wave. Sorry for the long quote, but this is Clone Crippen and Lavallin's reservoir shoreline study report. And the uncertainties in predicting both the extent and rate of reservoir shoreline impacts leads to the proposal to adopt an observational approach for periodically reviewing and updating the reservoir impact lines after the reservoir has been filled. So in lay terms, that means they don't know when that valley is going to quit sloughing. It's a highly unstable place. They can't tell. And so they're thinking, okay, well, create the dam, and people 20 years after the fact might find out that they are in a place within the safe line, which is a line. If you're within the safe line, you can't build buildings there. You can't live there over the long term because they can't guarantee that your house will stay underneath you. So the next slide is a picture of the Williston Reservoir. And note that Williston is a storage reservoir, so it has an annual drawdown that's much higher than Site C, but similar soils. This cabin, when it was built, was approximately a third of a mile back from the bank. And this was taken in 2008, and the cabin's long gone into the reservoir now. There are lots of geotechnical concerns, and I don't want to overwhelm people and think this is getting long, but just to reiterate what Gwen was saying, there are serious technical concerns with this dam, and that we don't have to understand, but we need experts in the field to be able to cross-examine the BC Hydro engineers in front of the BC Utilities Commission and make sure that this dam, that proposed dam, if they ever got that far, that it is a sound thing to do. Did I mention earthquakes? 2001, 50 kilometers downstream, straight line distance from the proposed site, a 4.5 magnitude earthquake in the Peace River Valley. So that's another additional concern. Site C is a very, very expensive dam compared to some of the other ones proposed in Manitoba and Quebec. As of last week, they updated their $6.6 billion estimate to 7.9 and counting, and that doesn't account for things like transmission lines to the northeast to the Horn River Basin. So there's huge economic considerations that we should be afraid, very, very afraid, and we get to pick up the tab if this is not, we backstop the debt for BC Hydro. Long-term electricity projections can be hard to call. The world has changed a lot in the last few months, since the last time of Site C was on the books, but also in the last few months, when you think about what's happened in Japan, the Japanese are afraid of their nuclear power now, and a country that leads the world in technology, research and technology, is going to be looking for innovation in electricity usage and supply. And so if we overbuild right now, we don't need Site C. If we overbuild, we could get left holding the bag. So in Victoria, so the options, in Victoria there's a company called Carmana Technology. It wins international awards all the time for leadership in solar energy. But companies like that need our support, and when we put $8 billion and counting into a hydro dam, that's old technology basically, we are taking away our ability to help foster that innovation and those 21st century solutions. And quickly, main tech, when people say we need more energy, huge movement towards main tech, which is fundamentally reinventing existing technologies. One quick example, there's a California company that's successfully redesigning air conditioning units to make them 80% more efficient. A third of the American residential demand is for cooling. That's air conditioning and refrigeration, but the same thing is happening on the refrigeration front. So that one technology alone completely changes long-term projections on how much energy is needed in the future. And we can skip through. These are just a couple of slides of options in BC. But personally, I like the main tech idea first. Lots of geothermal potential, lots of wind, and ocean energy. Eleanor Roosevelt said the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And I believe that British Columbia can have a healthy economy, can have innovation and jobs and be a world leader if we choose to go that route. Or else we can look backwards and build a dam that was designed 50 years ago in another century. And I would rather look forward. So thank you.